All right. Welcome to the Digging Doug podcast. I am your host, Doug, aka Digging Doug, aka D.L. Webster. And today I am thrilled to be joined by my good friend, Kisha Parker. Kisha is a licensed psychotherapist, former seminarian, an aspiring church planner, and also a realtor. So she has her hands on a lot of things and keeps busy. But we've been trying to get together for a long time. So Kisha, I really appreciate you taking the time out to do this, and I am looking forward to our discussion. So Kisha and I, as I mentioned, are good friends, and we've had good conversations just on our own. And as I started this podcast, one of the first things I wanted to do was to try to go over some of these terms that get thrown around. I know that I myself, as I have read things online or listened to other people having discussions about these different subjects online, they often will throw out and use these different terms and without defining them, just kind of assuming the audience knows. And I know even that myself, sometimes when I'm watching those, I may have heard the term, but also may still be uncertain about the term's meaning. So my thought for one of the, again, first things I wanted to do with my podcast is to go over these terms and talk about what these terms mean, so that we have that kind of base to work from. So there's an understanding of what all these things are, that these words are that people throw around. So there are a lot of these different things. So I've kind of grouped them into several different categories. So tonight, the first group that we're going to talk about are terms related to gender and sexuality and sex and all that. So that's the whole introduction here. So where I thought I would start is a traditional understanding, probably for a lot of people, about gender and sexuality is that a person's sex and a person's gender it's kind of the same thing, and there's just either a person is biologically or anatomically male and therefore masculine, or a person is anatomically female and therefore feminine. But Kisha, is that actually the case?
No, not all the time. Sometimes it is, other times it's not. They're not the same meaning. So sex and gender don't necessarily mean the same thing. So sex is referring more to biological things that are happening. So like genitalia and that sort of thing. Whereas gender is more of a social, some people say construct, a social construct, and it talks more about or refers more to how one expresses themselves. So whether they feel and relate to feeling more masculine or feminine or somewhere in between or neither one or both at different times. So, and how they express that, characteristically, more about traits than it is about sex characteristics or biological characteristics. So biology kind of determines how one is assigned sex, and then how a person feels within themselves characteristically as far as their traits are concerned, when it comes to masculinity and femininity or some combination, refers more to gender.
Let's start by talking about the physical, biological, anatomical, however you want to say that. And again, so we start out with the words male and female, and those are the correct words for a person's sex, right? Now the follow-up question will be, is it just those two? And I think, there are people or terms that go beyond that. So first of all, is that correct to begin with those terms? And then what other terms are there? And, if there's more than just those two things, what other terms are used for those, whatever's not just male or female?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, male and female, or male or female, can describe some people's lived experience when it comes to gender or sex, because even with sex, it's believed that you can only have a vagina or a penis, but there are people who are born with both. So that's not necessarily, that's kind of limiting to say just male or female. Like you said, there are others. There may be male, there may be female, there may be some combination of the two. Some people call themselves fluid, or some people call themselves gender fluid. I should say that. I have some that are gender non-conforming in my practice. So that means they don't conform to either gender. They don't even use that kind of language to describe their lived experience with regards to their gender and sexuality. And it seems like I'm missing one. So there's male, female, there's gender fluid, there's gender non-conforming, then there's trans, There's one.
Yeah, and does non-binary fall into that?
Non-binary, which is more of the fluid, speaks more of the fluidity, gender fluid, or gender non-conforming. I've heard those words sometimes used interchangeably. The non-binary and then the gender non-conforming, I've heard those used interchangeably. Fluidity talks about, it refers to people who experience both masculinity and femininity, sometimes at the same time or sometimes at different times. One day I may feel more masculine, the other day I may feel more feminine, so I'm not going to assign myself to either one. I'm fluid. Just depends on how I feel that day. So yeah, there's one, it starts with a P, and for whatever reason it's left me right now, and it's not poly.
Is that pansexual?
Okay, well, let's talk about sexuality. So,
okay. So I guess the way I understand, there's a few different levels. There's the biological, physical level. There's the level of gender, which is sort of, again, the we say social construct, but basically more the ideas and concepts about masculinity, femininity, or something else, but kind of in some sense how one's sex is expressed, I guess you could say. Although, again, from what I understand, a person's physical sex doesn't necessarily match what the traditional association with gender. Mm-hmm. So there's those two levels, but then there's the level of sexual orientation, which has to do with attraction and
yes,
and that. So I guess the way I think about it, I think about the biological first. Maybe it's just a way of, it just seems a little bit more concrete or whatnot. So we've distinguished that there can be, there's a lot of people that are male. There's a lot of people that are female. There are some that it's not as black and white as that. Mm-hmm. And do you have any idea offhand, how common or uncommon that is?
I don't have the statistics for that right now, and it seems like as new language develops, the statistics on that they change anyway, just because we have a new way to describe things and identify ourselves,
Yeah, and I know that's especially, I think, true with gender and sexuality or sexual orientation.
Mhm.
Um, I know I don't know numbers myself, but I think I've heard that it may be more common than has commonly been understood
Mhm.
that a baby at birth, where there'll be some level of ambiguity, or as you said, having some amount of both sexual organs or whatnot, and that at that time, what usually happens, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understand, what usually happens in those cases is that they will assign a sex, and that's another thing that that I hear, but that they'll basically kind of choose one or the other, and I guess surgically or whatever remove one. Is that true?
Historically that has been true. I know back in the day. I think now, and sometimes it's up to the parents, Um, now more families are allowing the child to just develop, and then if they want to choose when they become of age, then they can choose. Um, and that's more so about the physical aspect of it, as far as having anything removed or whatever. Sometimes as the child is growing up, they kind of choose or lean more to one side or the other, with regards to their gender expression. And so they may be more male or present themselves more in a more masculine fashion or more feminine fashion, and decide that that's who they are. And then when they become of age, or with their parents' permission, alter their bodies to reflect how they feel. So,
And another thing that has become a fairly commonplace now is pronouns,
mhm.
and people expressing what pronouns they want to use. Does Do the pronouns have more to do with gender or something else?
Yes, more to do with gender.
Okay. Um, so I guess, for example, if I think of myself as a man, male, masculine, whatever, um, and therefore I use terms like he and his. That's normal for
Mm-hmm.
me, and then vice versa for someone who's a woman. Usually, the typical or traditional words of she and her, and in that. Um, what other pronouns are there though besides that? Besides those kind of
Um,
traditional ones,
they and them. So she,
are
her, and
there?
hers, he, him, his, they, and them. And that's for the more non binary folks.
Okay, okay. How I think we kind of got in this here a minute ago with uh, talking about. I guess I'm trying to I'm trying to clarify it in my head as we talk about again the sex versus gender, and so again we have like man, woman, and then we have some people that don't feel like they identify with those. Trans is a common term.
Mm-hmm.
Um, isn't trans short for something, a longer term?
Mm-hmm. Transgender.
Transgender. Okay,
Well, there's
and
transgender, there's transsexual. Most of the time, when people refer to trans these days, they're talking about transgender.
and
So,
a transgender person is someone who, for example, was born a boy and or assigned male at birth, but then as they grow up, they don't feel like they are male; that they feel more female. Is that correct? or vice versa.
More something other than male, yes.
Well, I guess what would be the alternative? So if it's not like, I guess I'm thinking trans kind of means the opposite, where a person identifies or feels like they belong to the sort of opposite sex, if you will. So if that's not the case, what are the other alternatives?
From my understanding, the trans community encompasses any gendered person who is, or non-conforming, gender person who is identifying as a gender that they were not assigned as at birth. So whether it's I was born male, but now I'm identifying as female, or I'm identifying as non-gender conforming, or I'm identifying as gender fluid, or somewhere in between, non-binary, any of those encompass the trans community. You are transitioning away from the gender that you were assigned at birth.
Is there a difference between saying that someone is trans or someone claiming to be trans and, like you say, you referred to a trans community, I guess, is there a difference between like the community kind of embracing all these different possible things versus just what the trans term itself means? Or does the trans term mean anything that's kind of I don't know what you would say, like non-conforming, I guess?
Anything that's not cis, meaning whatever you were assigned as birth. So
that brings up a good point. Yeah, the term, I hear the term cis a lot. Is this short for anything? Is that something longer, or what does that word mean?
Cisgendered, meaning you live as the gender that you are assigned as birth. You identify as the gender that you were assigned as at birth. And then transgender is the opposite of that.
Okay. So like you said, that could not just be sort of opposite, but like kind of encompass anything that's right. Okay.
Anything that's not what you were assigned as at birth.
Okay. We're talking about gender, and I know you've kind of touched on this already, but I guess these it sounds like would be contained within the bounds of trans, but like you said, there's the terms like gender fluid or non-binary. Are there other terms related to gender as well? Gender fluid, I think, is maybe another one I've heard.
We talked about some of those earlier. Gender fluid, gender non-conforming, non-binary, that sort of thing, versus trans male or trans female. All of those are included in the language when speaking about the trans community.
Is there an important difference between any of those, or is it just all those terms kind of they all mean kind of the same thing?
No, they definitely don't mean the same thing. There are definitely important differences, and I think people, especially like when it comes to pronouns and that sort of thing, it's important because people want to be identified as who they are, who they really are. And that's any of us. Just like if somebody mispronounced my name, I'm going to correct them because I want you to say my name correctly. I want you to identify me correctly. So.
I guess I'd like to know understand more or better the differences between some of those. Like if some of those, I think we said that some of them are kind of similar terms, like I don't know, gender fluid or gender non-conforming or non-binary, some of that kind of similar?
Yes, that you don't necessarily fit into what traditional ideas of gender are. There's no box for you. So when you don't conform to that, if you're non-conforming, I would think that you're also non-binary as well. But to be non-binary doesn't necessarily mean non-conforming, because you could be non-binary and it just means that I'm not just male or just female. I feel like I'm some combination of the two. And then gender fluid, I mean, I can flow within, one day I can feel like one or the other. And the next day I can feel maybe like the opposite. I identify as being the opposite. So that means from day to day or moment to moment, however I feel, whatever I feel like, then that is how I identify. Non-binary is similar. It just means that you may feel like a combination and not necessarily one or the other. You know what I mean? So I think in all of them, there's a spectrum of masculinity and femininity. And depending on whatever language people decide to use to describe themselves, they describe themselves somewhere along that spectrum, where you have male way over here, female way over here, and then you have the other somewhere in the middle.
So yeah, so some people can, like you say, feel some combination, or other people feel more one way at one point and then another way at a different point. Or some people just don't like to be, I guess, kind of nailed down to either.
They don't feel like any of it. They don't have a box that describes their lived experience.
Is there any other terms like related to gender that you think would be helpful to know that we haven't already gone over?
I don't think
like
so.
Gender identity.
We talked about what it means to feel cisgendered or to be cisgender. I want to be sensitive to the language. And then there's transgender. And so those are the two main categories that people find themselves fitting into in one way or the other when it comes to talking about gender. So I won't even say categories. I'll just say as far as language and terminology is concerned. And it's very important to get that right here when we're having these discussions. And so I'm kind of tripping over my words because I don't have it all right. I'm still learning myself, and I've learned as much as I have just by being a therapist and serving that particular population. So I learn every day.
I wanted to kind of joke about we're creating a new binary in either you're cis or you're trans.
Yeah.
And I joke about it because of how I know a lot of people don't like the idea of binary and want to kind of break away from that. But yeah, no, that does make sense. And to your point, I know one of the challenges is that there's a lot of people. There's billions of people in the world, however many hundreds of millions in the U.S. And when you have that number of people, everyone has their own opinions and feelings and beliefs. And so when we're talking about subjects like this subject and subjects similar to it, where, it's about a personal thing, and it is not like a concrete subject. Different people have their different understandings and different beliefs about what these are. So I know earlier you mentioned, that you're not the expert, and I appreciate that. I'm clearly not either, but I just wanted to throw this out to just understand that and recognize that even as we're talking, that there'll be different people out there that have a different take or a different angle on it. And so we try to do our best to understand, and I'm that's a lot of the reason of me doing some of this podcast is to try to understand these things better, and as I learn to be able to share that with other people. The point being that it's not always super concrete, and there are a variety of opinions. I know, and this is another thing I think we'll talk about here in a minute, is like with feminism, that's one of these things that there's a lot of different opinions about and all. And so I think you just have to kind of recognize that with some of these things, there's not one, this is kind of what it means, this is what it is, this is the right way, and whatnot. So, so want to try to recognize that there are people with these different opinions, and as we interact, or as I interact, I'll speak for myself with them, to just try to be respectful and understanding of, if they say, no, this is how I see that, to be like, okay, okay, so we've done a lot of talking about sex and gender. The third kind of part of this discussion that's all related is sexual orientation. Mm-hmm. So again, kind of a traditional, I'm not sure off the top of my head what the word for it is, but the traditional is men are attracted to women and women are attracted to men. But clearly there are people who fall outside of that. So this is where I typically hear the letters LGBTQ and or some variation of that, sometime with a plus. I think now would probably be a good time to just say, what does that mean? What do those letters stand for?
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersexual. This is what some people refer to the I as. And then A sometimes is for ally, and then other times it's for asexual.
Okay, so lesbian, that refers to women who are sexually attracted to other women. Gay is refers generally, sometimes it's used, I think, kind of across the board, but is used more specifically for men who are attracted to other men. And then we have bisexual. So bisexual is that's a person that's attracted to either gender, or I guess some other.
At least two genders, yeah.
Yeah. And then what is the T for again?
Trans.
So that trans, we just obviously talked a lot about. So that's not a sexual orientation. That's more having to do with gender identity. Mm-hmm. Q is Q for.
Some people refer to it as questioning, and some people refer to it as queer. Queer meaning there is really no box to describe a sexual orientation. Okay.
And then you touched on a couple of other things. So again, sometimes I've heard of LGBTQ plus whatever. So you said one of those is asexual. So from what I understand, there's some people who just don't experience sexual attraction or feel a sexual attraction for others, and the term for that is asexual. Mm-hmm. Correct?
That's my understanding. I've talked to some who identify as asexual who say they do have sexual desire to have sex, but it is not directed towards anyone.
Oh, okay. And I think there's a couple other things I think I've missed. I think you said there was some other possible meaning for A.
For I, interesting. Oh, it can be ally. A can
ally,
be ally.
okay. And ally is another term that gets used. And what does that mean when someone either says that they're ally or that someone else is an ally?
That they affirm people who are along the LGBTQA spectrum or identify somewhere along the spectrum. So they affirm them and their sexuality. Or affectionality. I struggle a lot of times with referring to this topic as one just of sexual orientation. Because that's the first thing people think of is sex. And it's like, it's about much more than that, you know? And so oftentimes when I'm talking to people, especially when I'm talking to religious people or people that are really into church and that sort of thing, I refer to affectional orientation because I just really feel like reducing people down to just sex, you know, this act, is almost inhumane. You skip all these other parts that make up a person's affectional orientation, and it's not just about their bodies only. It's not just about the genitalia. So,
yeah, that's a good point. And one, I know myself, so I sort of forget to like that's worth pointing out that, and I think a lot of people realize that, you know, when they're talking about it, and unfortunately, I don't feel like we have a great term for it, but when you're talking about dating, significant other, marriage, romance, you know, those kind of terms, I think people sort of generally know what we mean, but those sort of relationships. And I think, you know, two people can just have sex in that and there not be anything else. But usually what people are interested in and those type of relationships, you know, there's a lot more to it than just sex. And in the attraction between people is more than just the sexual attraction part of it. That's certainly a part, but it goes, you know, beyond that. So that's a good thing to point out.
I would love for that to be true, that most people have that understanding, but where I come from, that's not the case. And so because they don't have that understanding, it helps them to be able to easily marginalize and dismiss and dehumanize people down to just this basic primal act that they can see as gross or whatever else just because it's happening between two people who have the same genitalia. So instead of thinking about the full humanity of the person and their affection and their love and how, you know, they view the world, interact with the entire world around them, instead, especially in religious circles, you know, sexuality and gender and all this stuff is just reduced down to this primal animalistic act that even animals engage into, instead of all that encompasses the person and their love and their affection towards wherever it's going. So,
yeah, thank you for that clarification. That's helpful. That's good. So you mentioned also intersex, I think. So could you explain what that is?
Back in the day, we used to refer to it, and it probably still is referred to as hermaphroditism. So people who are born with both sex organs, like we were talking a little bit about earlier, now we're referring to that as intersex.
Okay. So that has more to do with a sort of the sex category as far as the biological. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, that the term LGBT, I always have trouble saying it, LGBT, LGBTQ, or LGBTQ plus, some variation. That's essentially trying to kind of encompass all the people who have either sex or gender or sexual orientation that has been outside of kind of the norm, or what's most common for a lot of people, or what has been seen as traditional or whatever. And I would assume that has been done because even though those things are different, people experiencing or have the experience of one or more of those, they all share the experience of that being, again, something that has been seen or understood or is uncommon or less common or non-traditional or whatnot. And because of that, I think, as I understand, they've wanted to kind of recognize that in people who have had that similar experience of feeling outside or marginalized or not recognized or whatever, and to be able to support one another.
Yeah, it would be interesting to find out. I haven't done the research on it to find out when did like the acronym, the LGBTQIA plus acronym become a thing and why, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine we will have further conversations. I certainly hope and plan to have more conversations with you and other people down the line. And again, as I kind of mentioned in the intro, the hope for this initial conversation is to just kind of understand some of the terms, and then later on to get more into talking about the terms and history and various people's ideas about what they mean and whether they're good or bad or not. Like for this episode in particular, I'm wanting to stay away from any talk about whether this is good or bad and people's opinions of these things, and just kind of talk about what do these even mean. So we've talked a lot about. I think we've covered a lot of ground here with sex, with gender, and with sexual orientation. I'm trying to think. Are there other terms that we haven't gone over in regards to those that you think would be valuable?
I'm not sure. It just depends on what your goals for this particular episode are. And I know you wanted to talk about different definitions, but is there a certain category of definitions that you're trying to talk about and define and help people understand?
Well, again, just trying to go over common terms related to gender, sexuality, and sexual orientation. Did we talk about poly? I think that poly is another one I've heard, and pansexual, and what those mean.
For my understanding, pansexual, which isn't really included as one of the alphabet in the acronym for the LGBTQIA plus acronym, I think it's because it encompasses all of them. So basically means you just love people, period. Doesn't matter, genitalia, gender, expression, any of it. You just love human beings. And then for polyamory, that's talking more about relationship, the number of people in a relationship, and basically there's more than necessarily two. We most of the time think of relationships as consisting of two people, and in poly there can be more than two. Generally it's consensual. Everybody knows about everybody and everybody's cool with it. If it's not consensual and everybody doesn't know about everybody, then I don't think we're talking about polyamory anymore. We're talking about
Right.
infidelity.
Right.
So,
Yeah, for sure. So pan is like a skillet that you cook on, or the prefix pan I know means kind of all, or a large amount, or multiple.
yeah.
So that makes sense that pansexual would mean something like well, I guess the pansexual will have to do with a gender or orientation.
I think it encompasses all of it.
Oh, okay.
So they can love whoever, be oriented or have some affection towards whoever, regardless of their gender.
Okay.
Or sex.
Well, we've gone into that a lot. There's a couple other things I wanted to, a couple of other terms I wanted to talk about that maybe that's kind of a little bit beyond, or it's not exactly what we've been talking about sex, gender, or orientation, but it is related to those concepts. Mm-hmm. First one is patriarchy. That's something that gets thrown around a lot. What is the meaning of patriarchy?
From my understanding, it's basically a good old boys club. It's a preferential treatment for men. When it comes to social, political, cultural advantages, those are centered around men. That is my understanding.
Yeah, my impression is that it can probably be used a little bit in different ways, but or slightly different ways. But it's kind of a cultural thing about how which, dare I say, gender is primary in meaning that men have had the upper hand or the power, if you will, and so yeah, and Western culture has certainly been recognized, as with a lot of other cultures, although not all cultures have been recognized as patriarchal. Let's see. I want to talk about. I think this would probably be as good a time as any to talk about complementarianism and egalitarianism. Are those terms that you're familiar with?
I haven't used complementarianism much. Egalitarianism usually speaks to basically the opposite of patriarchy, where socially, culturally, even economically, things are distributed. Power is distributed equally across the board for all parties involved.
My understanding, the place where I've heard these terms the most has to do with a Christian context, and specifically about how it's usually in terms of marriage, because as you know, often in Christianity, the focus of relationships is marriage. So I don't know that it has to relate only to marriage, but again, that's where I've heard. So my understanding and where I hear it most is in conversations that come up. Again, my experience has been mostly with Christians about how spouses interact with each other. And a lot of it has to do with people's beliefs, or the theory about how spouses should act. And gender roles is a related term that I've heard a lot. So as I understand, the idea of complementarianism is associated more with what people would say would be traditional gender roles. And that would be the idea that, and the way I've heard it described, that people who hold that view will usually say that men and women are like equal but different, or have these different roles. And so there's ideas, people have ideas that women and or wives should generally do these certain things and fill these certain roles, and along with that, the men should fill these certain roles in certain positions and do certain things. And so kind of the flip side of that is egalitarianism, and that is the people who don't believe that men and women have to, are required to conform to these specific roles, but that both partners are two people, and if traditional gender roles work for them, then they can do that. But if they don't, or if they're flipped or whatever, that's completely fine. And I think what comes up as a big important part of that, and this may be getting a little bit into maybe beyond the definition, but kind of has to do with power. And again, I hesitate a little bit, because I think when people talk about it, especially people who are complementarian, they won't define it in that term. So I want to be maybe a little bit cautious and just recognizing that they will at least want to talk about other things and not kind of see it that way. But I think, as I see it, what happens is with complementarianism, there's usually most often an idea about someone who kind of has more responsibility, or final choice, or those kind of things. Whereas, and the reason I brought this up is because with egalitarianism, it's very much, I think one of the primary values there is the idea of equal in terms of power and choice, and like a partnership working together when there's a choice or conflict or whatever that comes up, rather than there being like, okay, well, if there's some conflict, this person gets to make that choice, or that person has the responsibility for whatever. So that's how I've understood those terms.
Yeah, same.
Okay, so there's just one final term I had written down to potentially discuss, and this maybe this could be a big discussion, and I think we'll try to keep it relatively brief. But that is feminism. So, would you share kind of your understanding of feminism?
Kind of
what that means?
It's kind of similar to egalitarianism, like we were talking about earlier, and it's just the belief in that, and the belief in and the advocacy of political, economic, and social equality of both sexes, or saying both sexes as though there's just one, and I guess there may be at least three, but just an equal distribution, or the advocacy of making sure that power is distributed across the board when it comes to economics, still the culture, and politics. We're still talking about equality.
That's, I think, a good explanation. I like that. I know it's been a term that I hear different people use at different times, and from what I understand, that there's a lot of history behind it. And so I've always felt that I don't really know necessarily what it means to other people and what associations different people have. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, I think it is one of those terms where a lot of people have different ideas about it and may think different things about it. And I'm sure I could do an entire episode. You could probably do a whole podcast on feminism. And I'm sure there are probably some feminist podcasts and all. I will say that I have heard relatively recently that there are potentially one way of understanding and seeing is that there have been several waves of feminism, whereas like the first wave feminism would have been often is referred to as women's suffrage, and the primary goal there was having the right to vote in the U.S. And then there's a second wave. I think there's either 3 or 4, but it is fascinating to try to understand. But yeah, as I understand, a lot of it has to do with, I guess one way of saying it is just to be pro-women or supporting of women. That probably oversimplifies it some, but I think that's a good way of seeing it. But I think I like what you said, and I appreciate what you said, where a lot of it has to do with the fact that traditionally, and we're both in the U.S., so with a U.S. context, there hasn't been equality between men and women and whoever else. It's been, men had the right to vote, women did not have the right to vote. We now do. Again, that was kind of addressed in quote unquote first wave feminism. But then for a long time, women weren't allowed to work in certain jobs, or at least that was very uncommon. And then there was things like, I know I heard, watched probably a video on YouTube about early flight attendants and how flight attendants they could only be women. They could only be like single women and like different things like that. So there's been this kind of inequality of opportunities and the way the different genders have been treated. And so, yeah, my understanding, it again, without a lot of historical context, that feminism has been about correcting inequalities and addressing those, pointing them out and seeking to address those. So, okay, we've talked about a lot.
Yeah.
I appreciate. Do you have anything else you would like to say to wrap this up here?
No, other than I'm just looking forward to the next conversation to see where this goes.
Well, good. Well, I do thank you a lot again for taking the time to come on and being willing to have this discussion. Like I said, I appreciate it. I'm hoping to both educate myself and share what I learn with other people, make this available so that we can educate. And because I think that's an important first step, is just kind of understanding some of these, what can be a challenging and complicated topics especially for people who are new to it or unfamiliar with it. So,
yeah.
Thank you. And everyone, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Like this episode, subscribe. You can find all the links. The podcast is available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can look my website up at diggingdoug.com. I think with a dash in there somewhere. Yes, digging-doug.com. And again, thank you. And we will look forward to talking to you next time.
All right. Take care.